What's up guys, welcome back. In this video we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most effective and overlooked blending techniques, the mythical stipple glazing. Before we start, let's mix a couple of colours to get things rolling. I'll use some Games Workshop Tallarn flesh, adding a little screamer pink to create a warm rosy mid-tone. Next we'll mix in some Kimera Pthalo Green and a bit more of the Screamer Pink to create a strong shadow colour. You can see I've already sketched in the midtone using that shadow colour as a base coat. To begin the blending process, we'll make a roughly 1-to-1 mix of our pink midtone and the shadow, and that's going to give us this intermediate colour. Use this to paint around the edges of your midtone, adding a small band of colour along the hard edge of each layer. This creates a more subtle step between the midtone and shadow, which will make the blending process a lot easier. Take a bit of your pink midtone and thin it down to a glaze consistency with some water. Remove most of the glaze from the brush by gently pressing the bristles on a paper towel. Test the consistency on your thumbnail, painting a few small dots with the very tip of the brush. The paint will react the same way on your nail as it will on the model. If you find you can't control the paint, tap the brush against the paper towel again and retest it. As long as your dots stay where you put them, you're good to go. Use stippling to blend out the edges of your highlights. If you've never done this before, all you're doing is lightly tapping the surface with the very tip of the brush, leaving behind small, semi-transparent dots. Building these up over a number of layers until the hard edge between the colours starts to fade out. Your main goal is to use the dots to obscure those hard edges. If you only focus on where the two colours meet, you'll end up with abrupt shifts between your highlights. Instead, try to imagine 3 zones around your highlight. Zone 1 is directly on and around the edge of your highlight. This is where you want the majority of your dots, and they should be tightly clustered together. Zone 2 is a little further away. Here, make your dots more spread out and infrequent. Finally, Zone 3 is quite far away, and you should only place a few dots randomly spaced out. As you apply more highlight layers, there won't be any clear point where one set of dots stops and another begins. This way you'll create a natural fade between the two colours. A key to this technique is to combine it with standard glazing. Using the same consistency, draw your brush over the surface, pulling the glaze up and over the edges of your highlights like this. Try to use the side of the brush when you're glazing, that way you can cover a larger area in a single pass, which is going to help minimise streaking. Be sure that you let each layer dry before applying a new one, or you'll end up with stains and small tears in the paint. The dots will create some noise on the surface, obscuring the edge of the highlight, and the glazes soften everything out, essentially filling the gaps between the dots, making the texture more subtle. Use a brush with a sharp tip so that you can keep your dots nice and tight, and make sure that you have control over how much paint is coming off the bristles. To develop the highlights, mix Vallejo Sunny Skin Tone with some Vallejo Ivory to create a light orange, and we'll mix that into our pinky midtone, making it lighter. Once you have that, you can block in the highlights. Think about the light coming down from above and imagine where it would fall on the surface of the skin. That's where you should place your highlights. So here on the upper side of the leg. Try to form your highlights so that they match the general shape of the surface that you're working on. We'll also paint in the knee and the back of the calf near the top of the muscle. Also pick out the muscle at the base of the leg with a very small line around the middle point. There's usually a little muscle there that catches some light. Thin your highlight down to a glaze consistency with a little water, and we'll begin the blending process. Just like we did with the previous layer, start by employing some stippling, using the tip of the brush to apply lots of little dots on and around the edge of the highlights. What you're aiming for here is to break that obvious edge around the outside of the layer, so that it's not a solid line. Then switch to normal glazing. using the side of your brush to draw the glaze up and over that hard edge between the two colours, always moving the brush towards the highlight. Use the stippling to create some noise or texture around the edge of your highlight, and then the glazes to soften things out. And you're going to switch back and forth between these two techniques until you create a pleasing gradient. The more time you put into it, the more refined it's going to be. How perfect you want to make it is up to you, but just take your time and try not to rush it. Once you're happy with the blending work, we'll take a bit of that light orange and mix it into our highlight to lighten it. Again, making a fairly noticeable shift in brightness. Block in your highlights using the same spots as before, but this time making them about half the size as your previous layer. Alright, so with those blocked in, we can thin that colour down with a little water and begin blending the edges out. Still using our stipple and glaze process. Try to use a brush with a nice fine tip when you're doing this. It's really going to help a lot with keeping your dots small and controlled. This one I'm using is an Escoda Reserva size 1. I've been trying it out for a while and I'm really quite impressed with it. The point on it is excellent. When you're doing these dots, remember that the goal is to create a transition from one colour to another. So don't just place them right on the edge of the highlight. Try to visualise those 3 zones that I mentioned earlier, allowing the dots to become more spread out the further away that you get from the highlight, leaving you with a nice soft blend from one colour to the next. If you place all your dots on the edge and don't go beyond that, you're going to get more of a messy edge around the highlight rather than a subtle gradient. For the last highlight, mix a little ivory into the light orange, making it brighter, then add that to your highlight colour, thinning it down with a little water. Now we're going to use stippling to add precise highlights. Try to imagine a line running down the middle of the leg and cluster most of your dots along it. Our highlights are very small at this stage, so there's not really enough room to be messing about with blocking them in first. The stippling allows us to be very precise with the placement, so we can keep the highlight super small while continuing that nice texture effect. To finish off, we're going to use some of this scale colour red ink, thinning it down with a little water. With very little on the brush, we're going to lightly draw it over the exposed knee. This is going to give the knee a slight red tint. You can also use a second brush to draw the edge of your glaze away to the sides. That's going to help stop any staining. Do this over a few layers, letting each one dry before adding a new one. And keep going until you're happy with the look. The more layers you apply, the more intense the colour becomes, so just stop when you're satisfied. Alright guys, hopefully that gives you a more solid understanding of stipple glazing. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Hit like and share the video, subscribe if you're new, and as always, don't forget to choose life, paint minis.